Hi, welcome to Third Space Live. I'm Jody, and today we're going to be talking about men's mental health with John from HeadsUpGuys.org. Before I introduce John, a quick reminder, you can learn all about Third Space Life Charity at thirdspacecanada.org. You can follow us on Facebook or Instagram, and you can also watch previous shows on YouTube. So men's mental health, what is this, and why do we need to talk specifically about men's mental health? What do men need to know? And what do people who aren't men need to know? Why do we all need to pay attention to this? Dr. John Ogrodnichuk is here today from Heads Up Guys to tell us all about this. Just so to introduce him and what he does a little bit more, I will add that HeadsUpGuys.org is a website and it's a resource to support men in their fight against mental illness and depression by providing information and resources and a bunch of other things to support men. It's a group of clinicians and researchers, as well as mental health advocates, who bring together their experience and their expertise to support men's mental health. John is a professor and director of the psychotherapy program in the Department of Psychiatry at UBC Vancouver. His research has been supported by various provincial and national funding bodies, and he's produced many hundreds of scientific papers. He's a really smart, highly qualified man to join us today in this conversation. And he also has his own consulting business that is available to support men around strategies for healthy living and recovery. And all that information can be found on Heads Up Guys. So I'm going to officially invite John into the conversation. There's his friendly face. Hi, John. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi, Jody. Thanks for inviting me.
I'm going to add one little tidbit before we get going. That clearly I'm not a man, but I do live with a man, my husband, and we also live with two twin 18-year-old sons. I grew up with a brother. I'm caregiving an elderly father who's widowed, so I love them. I have tons of men friends, men colleagues, and I care deeply about the men in my life and their health. And I can't wait to learn more from you today. So that's the hat I'm wearing in this conversation.
Super.
So tell us all about you and Heads Up Guys, and maybe we'll start there.
Sure. Well, I've been working in the men's space, if you will, for quite some time through my private practice. I have a lot of male clients, and more than 10 years ago, a close colleague, John Olof, who's in the School of Nursing here at UBC, he and I started Canada's first, and I think still only, men's mental health research program to do more work, systematic work around men and mental health. And part of the evolution of our work led us to thinking about different ways to engage men with their health, their mental health, and we came up with an idea around connecting with men in the digital space, recognizing that men often will turn to the internet to look for information, to self-diagnose, if you will, look for avenues of help if they're ready for that. And so we thought that's a good space to do it. And so that was really kind of the quick and dirty story, if you will, to how we ended up developing Heads Up Guys.
Maybe a starting place addresses one of that little piece of that information you just gave us, online support. Why are men online, and is there more to be said about that? What you know about that?
Well, I think we all do that now. There's such a treasure trove of information that can be found online. And men are no different than women in that. But I think maybe the aspect about being a guy is that a lot of guys have this strong sense of self-reliance, that they need to figure things out themselves. If something's amiss, not right, they need to sort it out and on their own, and not necessarily ask for help. And that is something that a lot of guys do struggle with, is asking for help, is that the sense of self-reliance is so entrenched in them, they can't actually bring themselves to reach out for a hand if they need it. That's not a universal phenomenon amongst all men, but certainly a lot of men are affected that way. And so we thought, well, rather than trying to fight that, let's go along with it, and let's give guys the tools that they need to, work on their health, help them get better if they're not in a place that they're happy with, and also provide pathways for them to engage with others, to kind of build a team around them to get on a path to recovery.
Yeah, great. And that's really important from my role here at Third Space to understand is that we can't necessarily change the behavior. We have to meet people where they're at.
Absolutely.
And get people the support they need. And maybe it ends up being an entry point to something bigger and deeper. And I know as a woman trying to support a lot of men in my life, that it's so great to have a resource that's specific to men, speaks their language, that you can defer them to, because for some reason there's a tendency that I've noticed, at least anecdotally, that a lot of men turn to women in their life as their emotional go-to person, and we don't have the skills that we need to be, even though we want to support them. So that's great that you have a place that men can go and that we can turn them to.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what's different about men's mental health than all gender mental health? What are specific differences?
Well, I don't think there's necessarily anything fundamentally different. We all experience, grief, sadness, anxiety the same. Some nuanced differences might exist in how men manifest distress, at least sort of early in the illness trajectory, if you will, before they can really understand and appreciate what might be going on. So, if a guy is struggling with aspects of depression, he may actually come across as angry or irritable, or be very withdrawn from others, turning to different types of coping mechanisms like drinking or smoking weed. These are things that we try to kind of numb the pain, if you will. And we kind of get caught up on those obvious manifestations and think that is the problem in and of itself. But really what it is, it's covering what's underneath, and that could be, a profound sense of sadness, really.
Yeah, good point. And that's so important for people to understand, how you can't really tease out other issues with mental health issues, because all too often substance abuse is self-medicating.
Mm-hmm.
So men seem to, at least historically or societally, men seem more willing to engage in a 12-step type of program than maybe going to a counselor or attending some kind of group work for men. Why do you think that is?
Well, maybe therapy itself is a little bit more threatening because it really requires somebody to be very vulnerable in an intimate setting, and you're really looking at the whole person himself. Whereas a 12-step program for alcohol abuse, that's really focused on a very discrete behavior. Maybe it's a little bit easier for guys to say, yeah, I got a problem with the bottle, and that's not so threatening to say, I'm very depressed and that's affecting my existence. And in the 12-step program, you literally go through the different 12 steps. It's kind of regimented. There's a group, guys kind of, or it's not just always guys, but people come together and they support each other through these steps, focusing on this discrete behavior about alcohol use. Whereas in therapy, if you're talking about individual therapy, it's just you, the therapist, working on really some intimate and often painful details of life that brought a person to that place at the end. And that might be just very unusual for guys. It's not a familiar situation for them. And it can be scary.
Mm-hmm. So why don't we talk specifically a little bit more about depression, which is the focus of the Heads Up Guys website as well, but we know from statistics, maybe you can speak to that a little bit, about the prevalence of depression and suicide in men and how that's different than females.
Yeah, well, really the big impetus for developing Heads Up Guys was recognizing the very high suicide rates amongst men. Men die by suicide at a rate 3 to 4 times higher than that of women, especially for young guys. It's, I think for men in 20 to 29 years old, it's the second leading cause of death. For men 30 to, I think, 40, it's a third leading cause of death. So a lot of men do die by suicide, unfortunately. It's not something that's talked about all that much. Usually when we talk about suicide, it's just kind of generic suicide, but what's missed in that is the detail that men account for about 75%. We also know that untreated or poorly treated depression is one of the big risk factors for suicide. So we thought one of the upstream ways of tackling suicide amongst men is addressing depression, educating men about what depression is. We have a self-check for them. We have prompts based on the score for that. What are some self-help strategies that they can engage with? Who are the people in our communities and lives that we can pull in and, as they referred to, kind of build a team around you to help you move toward recovery. So that's really the premise for what brought us to life.
Mm-hmm. And it's great because I'm familiar with the website. I actually have lived experience with depression myself, and I understand how hard it is to navigate when you're in the middle of that, experiencing that. And what I love about the site is you give really good information to people and you give ideas around how they can get help, and that's when our local services come in. That there's lots of great resources here in Kelowna, for instance, that can help men, whether it's young men through Foundry or any men through Connect Counseling or our services, and there's lots of other ones that hopefully that with that information and understanding that, depression is highly treatable, right? And suicide is not a great option, and it's, hopefully by looking at your site and learning more, they realize that isn't an option, and that help's out there, and they can get the help and return to a healthier life. I mean, that's important, because I think that when people are experiencing depression, they feel like it's never going to end or there's no solution.
That's for sure. When people are really stuck in that black hole of depression, it feels like they can't climb out, that it's just getting deeper and deeper, and the light is becoming dimmer and dimmer. And unfortunately for a lot of guys, they feel like the only escape from their pain is suicide. But, through many, many studies, some of ours included in that, talking to guys who had attempted to take their lives but survived, you ask them and they said they didn't actually want to die. They just wanted their pain to end.
Yes.
And so I think that's a really important thing. And then, taking that, and what we try to do is provide hope, provide optimism, direction, guidance, because you're right. When you're not feeling well, it feels like, there's such a labyrinth that you're caught and you don't know which way is out.
Yeah. And I think what I've heard, at least by talking to you and other people in the men's mental health space, is that men feel more alone often than women, because culturally it's not something they talk about all the time, is their emotional state, where more often women tend to share that information. So we know that other people are suffering or not in great places, where a lot of men don't realize how many of them are out there. Maybe you could talk to us a little bit about the prevalence of this.
Yeah, loneliness is a huge issue for men, and it's kind of ironic because you talk to any guy, and if they're feeling lonely, they feel like they're the only guy that feels like this. Yet when I share that this is such a common issue, it's like, really? And in fact, we have data from this from thousands of guys who have taken our stress test on our Heads Up Guys website. And loneliness is the second leading stressor in men's lives as far as frequency of endorsement, meaning that's out of all the thousands of guys that have taken the stress test, they've identified loneliness more than anything else except lack of purpose or meaning in life.
That's fascinating. And I assume that's because having those deep connections with people is what's lacking.
Yeah, it gets back to the vulnerability part, is that, the way that guys are kind of socialized to be men, it's about not showing weakness or vulnerability, being independent and, relying on yourself, not showing any kind of antithesis to the sturdy oak and stoic warrior kind of image that is projected onto men. And so through that, we as men tend not to have, sort of emotionally deep relationships with other people, especially other guys. We learn to distance ourselves from our emotions. And through that, we end up having lonelier lives, in all honesty, because of that.
That makes me really sad, and it brings a few things to mind. First of all, Justin Bieber's new song.
My kids, just played it for me a few nights ago. It's really sad.
It's heart-wrenching, and it's timely with so many people feeling isolated and lonely and disconnected right now with COVID, and all the pressures that are going on in the world. Justin Bieber's performance on Saturday Night Live, I literally cried because it was so heart-wrenching. What have you learned about loneliness, and what can be done about that to make men feel better, healthier?
Yeah, it's kind of an emerging field in many ways in the men's health space. The issue of loneliness. We're getting data now just demonstrating its prevalence. Now it's like, what do we do about it? And in fact, at Heads Up Guys past month, we actually had a campaign around loneliness. And it's like, what can men do to feel less alone? And in many ways, it really forces guys to get beyond the walls that they develop around themselves as a self-protective mechanism, and really forcing you to be vulnerable to those that are close to you, to allow those relationships to evolve more deeply. But on the other end of the spectrum, there's a lot of research around what are termed weak bonds. So these are relationships, if you will, with casual people in our environment that we might see on a regular basis. So whether it's the fellow at the butcher shop, or somebody at the baker, or the grocery store, or just the postal carriers, it's that we may not know them, but the regularity and the familiarity that they have in our lives, where we say hello, we share a smile or a brief chit chat, these are actually really important to help us feel connected to others. And even focusing on those is actually a big help for our sense of connectiveness, and thus a lack of isolation from others.
That resonates with me, because I think specifically of my elderly father, who's now alone, and he's such a chatty guy. He's friends with all those people in his life, and that is a big part of his life. And that's he looks forward to getting out and chatting up his dry cleaner and the person at the pharmacy, and that's absolutely good to know that that's important connection building.
Yeah, it really is.
So what about the situation with students right now, and young people in general, who aren't able to connect person to person? They're not able to socialize the same way. They're not even at school, a lot of them. What can you tell us about the state of affairs, or ideas for ways for them to maintain their mental wellness?
Well, I think for them, like for all of us, focusing on those little things that we can do to feel connected. Students for sure, I have 2 university kids at home right now. One of them's kind of a hybrid in class, online, the other's exclusively online. It's tough, when you're Zooming for hours on end each day. It's really, really difficult. You don't really feel connected to anybody in your class. And even my son was like, how am I supposed to meet girls? It's like, look forward to going to class for that. And it's tough. So it is a matter of getting out, as much as we can, to see people, with our pandemic situation. Everything's kind of changed. But nevertheless, there are opportunities to just see people and have, even like we were saying, those idle chit chats, if you will, with the pharmacist or whoever it is. Those are important, but also making an effort to be connected and stay connected with the friends in your lives, even if it's only virtually, but even if there's opportunities to come outside and go for a walk or a coffee or whatever, even if you can't be in the inside space, still that connection really matters. And so it is about putting effort into that, because if you don't, we're just going to let our relationships go by the wayside. Relationships take work to build and maintain, and so that needs to be remembered.
It's a really good point. I've got two anecdotal side notes to that. We had an interesting conversation here earlier today with the Lori Stevenson from the Student Union. She runs the Student Union here at the UBC Okanagan campus. And she was sharing with us information that she's been gaining around the student experience and what people are struggling with. And they've been throwing out different virtual initiatives to students to try to get them engaged and connected and support them. And one of the most popular initiatives was a online game night.
Mm-hmm.
And there's lots of websites and apps that you can play as a group. So that's something people can think about. You can also now watch Netflix together. I know my kids who are in their last year of high school and missing out on all the grad activities, which is not great.
Yeah.
They're sitting in front of their screen even though they don't want to. And I'll walk by and there's 6 of them on the screen and they're doing homework, they're eating. They're not even necessarily talking, but they're hanging out.
Yeah.
And so they're making that effort. They're also, my dad and my kids are talking on the phone regularly. And I can tell from talking to both of them how much they're getting from that. It seems like a simple little thing, but it's filling them up in a big way. And you're right, it takes effort. You have to make that call. You have to get on that, make that plan to play a game online with your friends. And when you're depressed, that's hard, but it's worth it. You know?
Yeah, that's for sure. It is, make the effort. And, the same thing when we talk about exercise. Oh, I know it's good for me. I should do it. I was doing it in the past. It's just fallen by the wayside. You really need to make that effort, as difficult as it is, because it won't happen otherwise.
Mm-hmm. Before we go, John, can you tell us a little bit more about what people will find on your website, and if they've explored your website and then they're looking for the next step, what that might look like?
Sure. Well, on the website, I think I mentioned a number of the aspects of it. We have a screening test for depression that will give different prompts for action depending on what the score is. We have a stress test that helps you kind of isolate things that may be going on in your life that could be contributing or being affected by depression. We have our practical tips section, which provides a number of self-help strategies for different areas of life that are impacted by depression, but then in turn can also be used toward recovering from depression. We have a section about connecting with others, whether that may be with friends or family physician, health lines, and then ultimately mental health professionals. Who are they and how do you connect with them? And then we also have a section for supporters of guys with depression. So friends and families, what are your roles? What can you do? What can't you do? And, importantly, taking care of your own health too. Because, if you've got a husband or a son that's depressed and it's like you feel you must do everything, the reality is you can't do everything, nor should you ever have that expectation that you need to do everything. And it can really draw on you, your energy and your effort, and leave you feeling exhausted too. So making sure that you look after your own health. And then we have a huge selection of guys' stories through articles or videos sharing their own recovery stories, tips. We have a lot of blogs on topics related to depression. So a lot of really great information in there.
Yeah, that's phenomenal. It's a wealth of information. That's great.
Yeah.
That's interesting you brought up recovery, because Sometimes depression is something people have to manage for their lives.
Mm-hmm.
And your first experience with it is very different than your day-to-day for the rest of your life with it. So it's good you have that section.
Yeah.
Helpful. And really helpful you have stuff for information and resources for people who are supporting people who are living with depression, because again, I've lived experience with that, and when somebody in your family is struggling, it impacts your whole family.
Absolutely, it does. Yeah.
And yeah, it's important for people to not feel alone in that experience as well.
Yeah.
Great. Well, I think that's enough for today, and I think that's a
Sure.
great amount of information for our viewers to get started. Is there anything else you want to add before we sign off?
Well, we went through quite a bit. I would just say if you are experiencing depression, don't feel like you have to go it alone. You never should feel that. Talking to others in your life, whether it is family member or friend or even a health professional, it's absolutely critical to getting on the path to better health. Keeping it to yourself is not a recipe for success. And you don't have to carry that burden on your own.
I would agree, and I would reiterate too your message of hope, that help is out there. You can be hopeful. This is something that can be managed, and you can get support, and you're not out there alone. There's a lot of people living the same experience as you, and there's
That's
help
right.
out there.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you, John. Learn more about everything we've spoken about at HeadsUpGuys.org, and learn more about Third Space at ThirdSpaceCanada.org. Hopefully we'll see you again next week, Thursdays on Third Space Live. Thank you, John.
Great. Thanks, Jody.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.